Well, Simon, I'm here right now with Simon Häggström, who is a hero of mine, a police detective in Stockholm with the Stockholm Police. You've been working in this field, specifically specializing in prostitution and trafficking for how many years now?
15 years.
15 years. And so here we are in Amsterdam, just wanting to sit down with you for a few minutes and ask some questions. Obviously, at Häggström, we really believe in the Abolitionist, the Nordic Model that began in Sweden 23 years ago. And I feel like you're probably one of the experts, the most prominent experts in the world, because you're actually seeing it implemented with the police, the arrests and prosecutions of the sex buyers and the pimps. I'd love to just hear a little bit of the backstory of how this law came to be, how it passed in Sweden, and for someone who's maybe never even heard of what the Swedish model is, their first time hearing this concept, just in layman's terms, if you could explain what the Swedish model is.
Sure. So the Swedish model, or the Nordic model, as it is also called, to just summarize it, it's about punishing the buyers of sex, but not the sellers. Mm-hmm. So it's a quite easy law to understand. It's illegal to buy sex in Sweden, but it's not illegal to sell sex. And today there are at least a few countries that have adapted the same laws in the respective countries. But back in 1999, when the law was introduced, Sweden was the first country in the world that introduced this law, and it was hugely controversial. And what I think is important to understand is that this was not a legislation that was put into place over a night or two. It was actually the result of a almost 30-year-long debate in how should society tackle the issue of prostitution. What is the best way? It was actually founded on research that started back in the 1970s. Yeah. And it came to the conclusion that it is not the sellers, it's not the women that is the problem in this. It's actually the men, the ones who are buying sex. They are to be considered the problem. And the Sex Purchase Act that we call it, or the Swedish model, is based on some basic principles. And I think the strongest one is the principle of equality between men and women. Mm. That in a modern society, men should not be able to buy a woman's body. That's kind of the core, the foundation of this law. I mean, what happens I think it's so important to emphasize the equality perspective. What happens in a society where young boys are being raised up with the mindset that if they want to have sex, they can just go to nearest brothel and pay for it. Mm. Just as you pay for a hamburger, you can actually pay for a woman's body. And that's just crazy. And that's not something that we want in Sweden. Yeah. Prostitution is not something that we want in Swedish society. That's the idea behind it all. If you look at the law and all the things that were written about it, prostitution does not belong in a society where there is equality between men and women. But there are also other perspectives. For example, the connection to organized crime, which I, as a police officer, I'm very keen of emphasizing that as well. I mean, we know today that human trafficking is one of the most lucrative crime types that we have in the world today, and we know also for a fact that it doesn't matter if you are in the Netherlands or you're in Germany or you're in Sweden, the women are the same. Mm-hmm. Here in the Netherlands, the majority of women selling sex are not Dutch students. In Sweden, the majority of women selling sex are not Swedish students. They are women from Bulgaria, from Romania, Russia, Ukraine, Colombia, and so on. And we know that a majority of those women are trafficked in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it's a very easy equation to understand that if you remove the sex buyers, you will automatically remove organized crime because there is no money to be made, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. But that seems like, for many countries, it's very difficult to understand this equation. But we see it so clearly that the criminal networks are into this because of one reason, and that is the money. And if we have no buyers paying the traffickers' salaries, then there will be no prostitution. And I think one of the most important aspects of this is to understand that human trafficking will always pose as voluntary prostitution. Okay, because in the debate I see each and every day, I see people who want to make a distinction between human trafficking and voluntary prostitution, but those are closely connected together. You know, you will not find a profile on the internet saying that, "Hi, my name is Anna. I'm a trafficking victim. If you want to buy sex from me, please call this number." Everybody is independent. Everybody claims to be there by their own free will, but we know for a fact that about 90% of all the ones that we're meeting don't want to be there, and are in the hands of pimps and traffickers. So you cannot really separate human trafficking from voluntary prostitution. They are closely connected, and since we know for a fact that a majority of women are being exploited by criminal networks, we have to have a legislation that aims to make it as difficult as possible for these criminal gangs.
Yeah, I think that just by virtue of the economics and the supply and demand, if you want to reduce the supply, you go after the demand, and the demand being the sex buyers, but also that impacting trafficking. Like, traffickers have no money to be made if there's no buyers. It seems very simple, but I know that it took so many years for Sweden, from all the research and listening to survivors and the input from feminists and research and data, and it was still a really brave and courageous law to pass, I think. But it's proven to be really effective, and I definitely want to get into some of the different social impact of that law. But just so people know, like, in Sweden, what are the penalties for pimps, for traffickers, for sex buyers? What does, if you are a Swedish sex buyer or a foreign tourist and you're trying to buy sex, what are the possible penalties that could happen to you?
Okay. I'll try to explain this in the best way I can. So if you start with the pimps and the traffickers, so the only thing that all European countries actually agree upon is to make human trafficking illegal, right? Everybody agrees on that. So the maximum penalty varies a lot between the countries, but in Sweden, for human trafficking, it's a maximum of 10 years in prison, which means that if you force someone, if you're using threats, or if you promise someone a normal job, but then you force them to do prostitution instead, then it becomes human trafficking. But the difference compared to many other countries, and when I go around and visit colleagues all over Europe, there is a huge difference here. It is that we have a secondary legislation that we call the pimping legislation, which means that if you as a pimp recruit a woman, for example, right now we are flooded with women from Ukraine that because of the war, they are being pushed into prostitution. And most of these women are actually aware of what they are going to do. They are not trafficked according to the trafficking legislation, but they are definitely pimped, okay? So they have these agencies who are taking 50% of their income, and the agency is providing an operator that manages all the contacts between the sex buyers. So the woman is basically put in the hotel room, and when there's a knock on the door, the pimp will inform her that you have a client showing up now, he's going to pay €150, and he wants to do this and this. So the pimps are running the prostitution business. Okay, so the woman knows that she's there for prostitution, which doesn't make it trafficking, but it's still pimping. Okay, and our pimping legislation has the same penalty scale, a maximum 10 years in prison, and that is a huge win for us because we do not have to prove that the woman has been subject to violence or threats or anything like that. If you are here and you are helping someone to sell sex, it's illegal. Okay, and that is a huge win for us and makes of course, it makes our investigations a lot more easier to carry out. So you can basically say that we have a zero tolerance on pimping. Actually, according to our pimping legislation, you are not even allowed. So let's say I have a friend, and my friend asks me, Simon, can I borrow your apartment? Because I want to sell sex from it. I don't want to be at home. Can I borrow your apartment instead? And I say, yes, you can. You can use it for 2 weeks. Even if I don't get any money at all, it's still illegal. Because I'm aware of the fact that my apartment is going to be used for prostitution, which makes it illegal. So the same thing applies even on the hotels. So it's in the hotels can, in theory, be punished for accepting prostitution in their hotel rooms. We don't have that problem because almost all hotels want to cooperate with the police because they don't want this kind of activity in their hotels room. But our pimping law is very effective for us as well. And then we have, of course, our laws targeting the sex buyers. And you could say we have 3 different laws. I think it's important to explain them all. If you, as a sex buyer, pays for sex from a person under the age of 15, it automatically goes as rape. Okay, because 15 is the age of consent in Sweden. If you pay for sex from someone that is aged between 15, 16 and 17, it's well, if you should translate this into Swedish, it would be exploitation of a minor in exchange for money, something like that. And it's a minimum of 6 months in prison. But if you pay for sex for someone aged 18 and up, then it's the Sex Purchase Act that kicks in. And we actually changed our law last summer. So before the 1st of August, 1 year ago, it was the punishment was what we call 50 days of fines, which would be proportional to your income. So if you had a lot of money, you would receive a higher fine. If you had no money, I think the minimum fine was about 250 euro. But the last summer, we changed this because the politicians said that paying for another, for a woman's body, it shouldn't, you shouldn't get away with just paying a fine. So now the minimum punishment is 1 month in prison, which is, in most cases, transformed into conditional sentence combined with fines. But it is a jail crime nowadays. It is. And if you do it repeatedly, if you do it again a second time, you will have to serve jail time. So the law has been sharpened a little bit at least, but there is still a long way to go, definitely. So when we arrest the sex buyer nowadays, we will inform him that yes, you committed this crime, and the standard punishment is 1 month in prison. And of course that has a deterrent effect because many of these men are they have families, they have normal jobs and so on. So I think it's very important to also mention the normative effect that this law actually has also on the population. The law sends a clear signal. If you look at the back in the 90s, there was a huge poll made where people were asked whether we should criminalize the buying of sex or not, and almost 70% were actually against it, saying no, we should not. Today, we can say that about 70 to 80% are actually in favor of the law. So has been a huge shift in mindset. Back in the 90s, the Swedish police even opposed the legislation, said that we should also criminalize the selling of sex. Several political parties opposed the legislation as well. Today we have all political parties, including the opposition, are in favor of the law, and that is probably the only thing that they all agree about. So there is a kind of there's a solid support, I would say, from the police, from the political parties, from a majority of the population. So
that was definitely what I found when I was in Sweden last year and interviewing a whole range of people in government and activists, social workers, organizations, survivors. I would chat to random people on the street to really try and investigate what is the general feeling towards this law. Are you aware of it? What is it like living in this country as a woman. And I was really impressed to hear from some of the social workers and organisations of how they work with the police in assisting survivors and those who do outreach. So can you speak into a little bit about what that part of it looks like, the impact of the law of prostitution being decriminalised, but not just non-regulated decriminalised, but actually services being intentionally offered to victims and survivors?
Yeah, this is something that when I started this job together with my colleague back in the days, we didn't have any cooperation with the social services. We were just out there making arrests, but we felt quite soon that we are police officers. We should do police work. We should run investigations. But we were constantly meeting all these women and also children who was in a really bad situation, and sometimes we felt like 50% police officers and 50% social workers. Because if you're going to do this job and if you actually want to help someone out of it, you have to like go the extra mile. And we just felt that this is not our role. So we started in Stockholm. We started to build this cooperation with the social service. How is there any chance we can work together? So today, 15 years later, we have. I would say that's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of. What we managed to do. So the city council that's in charge of the social services has signed a contract together with the police force, which basically says that police and social services should work together. So all the shifts when we go out, arresting sex buyers, finding payments or whatever we should do, we always have 2 social workers with us. And those social workers are not just randomly selected. They are specialized in this. The social services has its own, it's called the section against prostitution and human trafficking within the social services. So those are specifically trained in dealing with human trafficking victims and dealing with minors that have been sexually exploited and so on. So 2 of them are always following with us. And that's it's a win-win for everybody, because the social workers, suddenly they get access to environments that they would normally never have access to. Right. Because, we have a police badge. We don't care whether people say you're allowed to come in or not. We will go in anyway because we can do a search warrant. A social worker cannot do that. For us, the winning is it's indescribable, because all the things that has to do with helping someone to a shelter or to receive financial support or whatever it is, we can just leave it to the social workers. So that is a really, really good thing. But there are also challenges, of course, because a majority of the women that we meet, they are not from Sweden. They are they don't have a Swedish citizenship. And if you look at the Swedish social welfare laws, they are targeting Swedish citizens, right? So as long as we are dealing with a woman that actually has a Swedish passport, then the social workers can do quite much. But if we're dealing with a woman from Romania, then they are more limited. So we definitely saw that we had to do something about this. And so what we've done is that we are cooperating a lot with NGOs who can fill that gap, especially with an organization named Talita. They are running a shelter. That's an organization, it's an NGO who are only dealing with helping women out of trafficking, prostitution and pornography. And the cooperation that we have with them, it's amazing. They have a hotline, so we can call them 24/7, and they will always help out. So our social workers, if we find a woman in the middle of the night, and that we maybe arrest her pimp, and we shut down the apartment, and she has nowhere to go, and she's being brought to Talita, and they have a 1-year rehabilitation program to get out of the world of prostitution, where she gets help with everything from trauma therapy to more practical help with jobs and so on. So that's proven to be very successful. I think that's one of the keys to successful work, is to understand that there is just not one police officer or one social worker that can do everything. There are different key actors in this that has to take the responsibility. And if you can find the right persons in all these positions, then you can do a really successful job. And this is something that we built over the course of 15 years. So, but it works out really well. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I had the privilege of meeting with Talita when I was in Sweden, and a survivor in their care who had been exploited in other countries in Europe told me that she'd been treated badly by the police. She hadn't been offered any assistance. There isn't an emphasis on exit services in countries with legal prostitution, where prostitution is classified as a job, but in Sweden she'd actually been assisted, treated kindly by the police, and been given programs, and spoke really highly of the law in Sweden. And I'd love just to hear your perspective on how 24 years into this law now, what has been some of the social impacts on like young men growing up under this law, where it's a criminal offence to rent someone's body for sex. It's the idea of sex and money. It is seen as a crime, but I've heard from different people, and I just love to even hear your perspective on how it's impacted the culture and the mindset around buying sex.
You see, when you're living in Sweden, I don't think you really understand how big impact it has on our society. But you are constantly being reminded of it when you go outside Sweden, especially if you go to countries where prostitution is legalized, like Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, and so on. I remember I was in Berlin a couple of years ago, and I had this. There were two of us. It was one of the chief superintendents of the trafficking units within the Berlin police, and it was me. And he was going to speak about 20 minutes about how they did their job, and I was going to speak about how we did our job. So afterwards we talked, and what he told me, this high-ranking police officer, was that he said, "Simon, you know what touched me the most with your presentation? It is the impact it had on your society, because when we go out and do our work here in Germany, and we do a brothel check or whatever, we can encounter a bunch of 18-year-old boys who are celebrating their soccer game, winning their soccer game by going out buying sex on a brothel, and that's just a disaster. And when I'm a lot in Sweden, I go out a lot to schools, because I'm writing books as well, and many of these books are being used in school. So I go out a lot, and then I talk to teenagers about this. And I mean, this law in Sweden, it's not controversial. I mean, the generations that are in their 20s now, they've been raised with this law. They don't know anything else other than it's definitely wrong to buy sex. So the law itself has a huge impact on the mindset of the population, and I think that's the opposition against the law back in the 90s was really strong. A lot of people did not want it, but the Social Democrats were in majority, so they introduced the law anyway. And I really think that a majority of the population tends to follow the law, wants to follow the law, and by just introducing the law, the mindset changed. But what I think it's very important to do is to what I can see a lot is the lack of knowledge on the reality of prostitution. It sounds weird, but a lot of people are still caught up in this Pretty Woman movie from the 90s, and actually do believe that a majority of women actually did choose this. But what I think we've done in Sweden is that we've put a lot of effort into raising public awareness on the reality of prostitution, and that is not interviewing pro-prostitution sex workers organizations. It's about hearing from survivors. It's about hearing from police officers and social workers who are out there in the streets, who actually can give a true picture of what we see out there. And I think that's something that has been really important for us to be there in the media, to talk about what we see out there, because the world of prostitution is closed to the public. You know, the only thing that you can, as a normal citizen, you can read about it in newspapers, you can watch documentaries, but you cannot really see it. we do have some street prostitution, but not much. Most of it is closed for most people. So that's why it's so important to raise awareness and to constantly be out there and describe what the situation looks like, and to get people to understand that 95% of the women that we are meeting don't want to be there. It's not a choice. It can only be a choice if you actually have choices, right? But these women, they don't have. The only choice they have is to see their family starve, or to put themselves on the altar of prostitution and to sacrifice themselves, out of love to their families. And that's something that I used to say all the time when I meet young people. You have to see it from their perspective. If you were in a situation where you were going to see your family starve or enter prostitution, what would you choose? Yeah. And then a lot of people understand what these women goes through. And so there are so many myths, there are so many lies, there are so many misconceptions about who choose to sell sex and who choose to buy sex. And I think there's a lot to be won if you talk about it in the media.
Yeah. We often say, I think it was Rachel Moran actually in her book Paid For, that said prostitution is the choice of those with the fewest choices, and just breaking down that whole notion of choice. And for those of us who've actually worked directly with women exploited in prostitution, you know that it's never a fully informed choice where they have other options on the table, and the reality of one day in the life of someone who's being exploited in prostitution. Once you've worked directly with this population, and I've been in about 12 different countries, different red light districts around the world, seeing prostitution in so many different forms, and I'm thoroughly convinced that it's the most exploitative industry for women and vulnerable people, whatever vulnerability the pimps prey upon and use. And it's such a system of violence. And I think that's one of the reasons that we are making films about this topic, to try and tell the stories and to raise awareness and show people the reality of prostitution, to hopefully garner or continue support for this law. And it's since it was introduced 24 years ago, it has had an impact on human trafficking, and there has been a decrease in demand. And I don't know if you could speak into that or compare Sweden to a country like Germany or the Netherlands within Europe, how the difference in these two models of legislation have impacted trafficking.
Sure. Well, if you look at the amount of sex buyers, I'm not really sure about the stats specifically for other countries, but if you look at Sweden, there has been done a lot of polls during the years, how many men in Sweden actually does buy sex. I know if you look at Spain, I think around 40% of men would buy sex at least once in their lifetime. I read that somewhere at least. In Sweden, we are about 10%. We've been down at around 7.8%. The maximum was 13.6% before the law was introduced back in 1996. But now we're around 10%. But what's interesting here is that if you look at these polls, a majority of the interviewed men are claiming that the last time they bought sex was not actually in Sweden. It was outside Sweden. Right. Okay, and like on a business trip or if you're tourist somewhere. But and that's kind of fascinating, because when you go to conferences and talk about this, someone will throw it in your face saying, "But that just shows that your law isn't working, because you're just pushing the problem away from you." But I see it the other way. I see it, well, it proves that it in fact is working, because the sex buyers in Sweden does not dare to buy sex in Sweden in the same extent as before, right? So most of them will do it when they're outside, when they're abroad. So I mean, I think it's important to say that the Nordic model will not save the world. Prostitution will still be there, and we still have problems with prostitution and human trafficking. It will not be like a quick fix, but it will definitely push back both traffickers, pimps, and sex buyers. I mean, we even have when we've done wiretapping, we've heard traffickers talk to each other, saying that no, let's go somewhere else. During the pandemic, for example, we had criminal networks trying to establish themselves in Sweden because the brothels in Germany, for example, were closed due to the pandemic. So they were looking for other arenas, and they tried to build something, but they failed because the police were constantly doing checks. We were outside arresting buyers, so they went away again. So I think it's probably quite difficult to operate a prostitution business in Sweden if you compare to a country where it's not even illegal. I mean, why should you choose a country where buying sex is illegal, where pimping is illegal, when you can actually choose a country where all these things is not even a problem? So I mean, I think it speaks for itself, of course, that if you want to at least lower the amount of trafficking and prostitution, then of course you should criminalize the perpetrators. Definitely. So
we completely agree. And something you mentioned earlier of this law doesn't solve the problem completely, it doesn't eliminate prostitution, but the goal is to shrink the sex industry. The goal is to have the highest deterrent, the highest penalties. And so France, a few years ago, I think in 2016, passed the Nordic Model, and we were just there. And I think the law is in itself is brilliant, but that's just the first step. The second step is implementing it fully with both the police force and the social services. Have you spent any time in France? Or,
I testified in the Senate actually. Before the law was introduced, and it was. I mean, to be honest, we were a couple of Swedes that went there several times, and to be honest, I never thought that they would pass the law because the resistance was huge. Also for the police, I was speaking at a conference, I don't know, somewhere in the world, and there was this high-ranking police chief from France coming up to me afterwards and say, "Yes, so you know, Simon, France will never adopt your model." It's because it's like in France we're proud of the freedom of the individual. People can do whatever they want. That's why your law will never be introduced in our country. And I was thinking of writing him an email a couple of years afterwards, I was there several times, and I've been there training police officers, and I think today in at least some regions they are quite effective arresting buyers. France was really good even before the law was introduced in hunting down pimps. Probably considered to be one of the best countries in Europe. So they are an efficient police force, but it was the same thing in Sweden. If you look at the statistics when it comes to arrested sex buyers, back in '99 and the first years, there were hardly any buyers arrested, at least sentenced. Some reports were being written, but not many were sentenced. Today, I mean, right now, I have about 250 open investigations with men suspected of buying sex, just me and my colleagues. So, I mean, every year there are hundreds of men being arrested for this. But what I want to mention also with the impact of the Sex Purchase Act is also, for me, one of the absolutely biggest winnings of the law is the signal it sends to the individual woman that we meet out there. This is quite difficult for me to describe in words. But if you let's say you're from Ukraine, okay, so you've been pushed into prostitution. You go to this country, Sweden, which you basically know nothing about, okay, and men are knocking on your door 24 hours a day. These faceless men, who gets access to your body, and suddenly it knocks on the door again, and there are 2 police officers and 2 social workers. And you were expecting a client, okay, but now there's something else. So in the beginning, you are scared to death, because maybe, well, let me say like this: police is not always something positive. If you come from different countries around Europe. And these 2 police officers are sitting down with you, explaining the legislation, saying, "Hey, don't worry, you have done nothing wrong, okay? we are after the ones who are coming and visiting you, because we believe that these men are taking advantage of your situation. They are actually exploiting you. And we don't accept that. But you have done nothing wrong, okay? I mean, if people, sometimes I wish we could have a camera with us filming the reaction to see how a woman can be so scared. We had actually a case 2 weeks ago where a woman was, she didn't open, and we could hear that something was wrong on the inside. We thought that maybe there was a client there and he was getting violent towards her. So we opened the door, but it turns out that she was actually was going to jump out through the window because she was so afraid when it heard it was police from on the other side, because she thought that we were going to arrest her. Okay, and then we sat down with her and we explained the legislation, and it's like another person. When we leave, it's like another human being, and I really think that sends a signal, because and it also protects the women. I mean, one of the major myths about the Sex Purchase Act is that it will become even more, it will generate even more violence against the ones selling sex. I would say it's the other way around, because these women knows that they can call the police without any risk of being punished at all. And the sex buyers know that they have to behave. Because if I do not behave, if I don't pay, if I get violent or whatever things I do, this woman can call the police, and within seconds I can be arrested. So I would say this legislation actually protects the women. And you can see that very clearly in the statistics. Since the law was introduced, we haven't had a single murder on a woman in prostitution. The sex worker organizations claim there is one woman murdered, but that had anything to do with prostitution. She was backstabbed to death by her ex-boyfriend, right? So we have 0 murders on women in prostitution. If you look at Germany during the same time frame, I don't know the exact figure, but I think it's around 100 women who have been murdered in prostitution environment. So I think that speaks for itself as well. I mean, if you legalize the world of prostitution, the amount of violence will automatically increase, because there are no limits anymore. The buyers can do whatever they want without any risk of getting punished, right? This law clearly sends a signal also to the individual woman that she is to be protected by the police and not rejected, like in many other countries where the view on women in prostitution is basically them being the lowest of the low. But the Sex Purchase Act actually encouraged the women, saying that, hey, this is not your fault. We understand that you come from a situation where you don't want to do this. That's why we are at least trying to protect you. We do not always succeed with that, because of course there is still violence connected to prostitution even in Sweden. But at least we try to do something. We try to catch the bad clients. We always give our cards to the women that we meet. We say to them, contact us. If there's anything we can do for you, just contact us. Because we see that many of these women have been subject to a lot, but they don't dare to go to a police station. It's too much shame, it's too much guilt, they're afraid. But if they get to meet with a police officer that are specialized in this, they will definitely give you a call if something happens, because then there's a trust, right? So we work a lot with women who we have met before, and we might. I mean, I can take a very clear example of that just happened a couple of months ago. One of a woman who is considered to be one of the luxury escorts. I don't know what that is actually, because I see the same exploitation everywhere. But she actually made it quite clear to us 3 years ago, I think it was. And she said, Simon, I don't want anything to do with you. Okay? I want to protect my clients. I have chosen to do this, and I'm not feeling bad about it. Okay? So, and I said, of course we respect that, but take my card. Okay? Because according to my experience, sooner or later, something will happen, okay? And then you at least know that we are here for you, okay? And we will respect you. We will not do any bad things. We respect you. If that is your position, then we will respect it. But please take my card. So a couple of months ago, this woman calls, and I don't even recognize her voice. So And she introduced herself, and I started, do we know each other? And then she said her profile name on the internet. It's me, right? Wow. And I was, wow, it's you. How are you? And she was telling me, Simon, I need to talk to you because I've lost everything, and I'm starting to go crazy. I don't know what's happened. I'm hearing voices, and I met with this woman like 3 years later, and it was speaking to it was like another person, and you can see how prostitution damage a human being, how it basically ruins a human being's life. That's the consequence of prostitution. And it doesn't matter if you have a pimp or not. Many times we are caught up in this debate whether the women have pimps or not. It doesn't matter if you're a pimp or not. Prostitution, being in prostitution itself is destroying your life, right? That's so clear. So, and I think that's one of the basic principles with the Sex Purchase Act, that we don't really care if the woman has a pimp or not. It is still as illegal to buy sex from someone. We don't care if there's a pimp involved or not. Why? Because prostitution is destroying young women's life on a daily basis.
I think that is so true, and that the whole idea of how do we make prostitution safe when it's not the outside conditions that make it safe or less traumatizing, like the inherent trauma that comes with prostitution. Like, we've seen the same things. We've made another documentary that hasn't come out yet on the myth of the high-class escort, looking at Vegas as an example of that. But that's such a powerful story. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the responses you have from sex buyers when you arrest them? And are most of them Swedish men? Are some of them foreign tourists? Are they angry? Like, what's that like when you arrest them?
Wow, I have so many stories to share. I can share one of them, just so you get a impression of what we're facing. So, because of the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, we've seen this big increase of Ukrainian women coming to Sweden selling sex, and they have no former experience of prostitution before the war broke out, right? So everybody says the same. I don't have. I have my parents. They are still in Ukraine. They refuse to flee because they will not, abandon their country. But the problem is that the daughter, has to provide for her family back home, and having no other options, she's being recruited by pimps. So we try to target the men who are buying sex from the Ukrainian women, because they have fled the war, and we really think it's important to send a strong signal that you should not get away with exploiting these women. So let's just mention real quickly a case. We did surveillance on a hotel, and suddenly one of the women leaves the hotel, and there's a taxi coming up outside the hotel entrance. So she takes the taxi, and me and my colleagues, we immediately realize that she's probably on her way to a client. Some clients, they don't want to go to the woman; they prefer the woman coming to them because they feel more safe. Okay, but what we did obviously was to follow the taxi, and we could see in the distance that the woman was meeting with this man outside the taxi, and they went away. And we weren't really sure about which house they went into, so we started this was in the middle of the night, so we were starting looking through the window, see where can they be. And then I see this house, and there's this entrance door, but there are small windows in the door, and I can see that something is moving there. So I go up to the front door, and I can see that in the hallway there is a man having sex with a woman. Okay, basically in the hallway, and I can see that it is the woman that we know from Ukraine. So I understand that this right now there is an ongoing crime. So let's abort this. So I'm shouting, is police outside, open? Okay, so he's in shock, but he opens the door and he's arrested, and our social workers takes care of the woman. And he tells me, please, Simon, speak, don't speak so loud, so you don't, because you will wake my daughter. I said, where's your daughter? Well, she's there. And it was 6-year-old daughter sleeping on the floor, on a mattress, just beside him. And I said, well, how could you do this? How you are buying sex and your daughter is sleeping 2 meters away from you. How? And he's, of course, he at least he claims to be feel a lot of shame, and he feels very bad about this, of course. And then I see around in the house that there's a family living there. It's not just him and his daughters. I ask him, where's your wife? And initially he don't want to answer that question. But I'm pushing him because there's a child involved, our social workers also has to talk to the mother of the child, because we're concerned about the welfare of the child. So the woman has to know as well. But suddenly, I'm pushing him out, where is your wife? And it turns out that the wife is in the hospital and she gave birth to their second daughter 3 hours ago. Yeah, that's the kind of cases that we're facing. That's actually one of the most common excuses that we hear from these men. That is that we don't have a working sex life right now because my wife is pregnant, or my girlfriend we just had a small child. So this is the things that we have to sit and listen to. Okay, or for example, that another common one is that I don't know how to explain this, but I don't want to cheat on my girlfriend, so therefore I'm buying sex instead. Can you understand that one? Because it's quite difficult.
That says everything about how they view women in prostitution as less than human. Like she doesn't classify as another woman.
Yeah. And what they are claiming is that, because I said, how do you mean buying sex is not cheating on your girlfriend? Well, because there are no emotions involved. It's just about sex. So it's definitely it's like consuming a hamburger. You can consume a woman, right? It's basically the same thing. And another frequent one is that excuse that we hear is that we had a fight. Me and my girlfriend had a fight. So, we had I'm sorry, Simon, I know what I was doing, that is wrong, but I just want to know that we had this big fight and I was so angry and I had so much frustration. So I went to buy sex. It doesn't make any sense. But of course, many of these men, they have a lot to lose. And I think that's also one of the big gains when it comes to the Sex Purchase Act, that this is one of the most shameful crimes that you can be arrested for. Okay. It's kind of fascinating to see what these men are risking, because they're risking everything. You're risking your family, of course. You're risking your whole social network, because in Sweden it is not acceptable to buy. If I as a man would go out with my friends in a bar and I would start to brag about, hey, last night I met this woman from Russia and, I paid her for 30 minutes and we just had this great time. My male friends would probably kick me out. That is not accepted at all to do that kind of things. So you're risking your whole social network, you're risking your job. I mean, we've had so many examples of men who had to leave their jobs because the companies don't want to be in any way associated with this kind of criminal activity. So they're risking a lot, which means also that the reactions can vary a lot. Some of them are getting violent, picks a fight with us. Some of them are trying to flee from us, trying to run away from us. Some of them are just crying, and everybody really regrets what they've done. But if you examine the reason why they regret, is not because actually what they've done, it's because they was caught, right? That's the primary reason why they are so sad. But yeah, I've sat down with a couple of thousand men in this situation during all these years, and what has been quite surprising is that not a single of them are actually interested in talking about the woman that they've just met. If they were really understanding what they've done, they would of course ask me, Simon, why are you here? What have I done? What is it with this woman? There are hundreds of profiles out there. Why are you here? Is she trafficked? No one. They would ask, all the questions that they have would be about themselves, right? Will my family get to know about this? Will you inform my employee? Will the newspapers write about me? How much is the fine? It's just me all the time. And that just shows that these men, they don't care about these women, you know? Because sometimes I hear in the public debate that we need to educate men. We need to educate the sex buyers so they realize what they are doing. But I say they are fully aware. If you have sex with someone who doesn't want to be with you, you will feel that in that, you know, intimate connection. Yeah. If you have sex with someone who wants to be with you, you will feel that as well, because there is a mutual attraction. So these men, they are having sex with a young woman from Romania who cannot even speak English, and basically is crying. Of course they understand, but the thing is they don't care. And that's why the lawmakers have to step in and say, no, we don't accept this, because what this basically is, not according to law, but according to my experience, this is basically paid rape, okay? Because sex is something beautiful when it's between two consenting persons, right? But the thing here is that what these men are doing is that they are paying to remove the consent. They're having sex with someone who doesn't want to be with you. That's why I cannot see any other I cannot describe it in any other way other than it's paid rape.
Yeah. We fully agree. And when we were interviewing sex buyers for our film Buying Her, one of the most shocking questions that all of these men were asked and answered was, if you knew she was trafficked, would that have made a difference? And all of them honestly said, no, in that moment, you're so selfish. You're just thinking about what you want. It's all about what I want. And that's really tragic, because to me, these men are acting out in almost a dehumanized form of themselves, like no empathy. And what's led them to that place is deep addiction, deep dysfunction. We have, like, the men that we interviewed in the film had gone on to lead lives of rehabilitation. So I do believe that's possible, but it's only down to a lot of work and a lot of determination that I think often comes from facing the consequences. Like every single one of them, it was a loss of their wife leaving them, or it becoming known publicly, or an arrest. There was some consequence. And so that's why I feel like the law is such an important part of intervention. And I have to hope that rehabilitation is possible. And we know of some of the buyers that have, but the more, I'm sure, the more you see sex buyers and this kind of mentality, the more passionate you are about preventing it. Like no little boy wishes to become a man like that. So how do we prevent? And what is the role of society or pornography in facilitating that? But the reason we made a film on this entire topic is because of that wrestle and tension and like opening up this conversation. Who are the sex buyers and what are their mentality? And I think for anyone hearing or believing that prostitution is in any way empowering, hearing the truth of the men. I mean, people who would argue in favor of prostitution as a job, just hearing what you just said, I think opens the reality in such a brutal way that's really important. That's why we made this this whole film.
But it's also very, very sad. It's such a tragedy. I mean, it's 2023 and we're still in a situation where tens of thousands of young women are being sacrificed just because men needs to have sex. And maybe this is controversial to say, but a man can't survive without sex. You know, having sex is not a human right. It's about two people, two individuals, right? And one thing that we haven't even spoken about is you just mentioned it, but the connection to pornography. Wow, it's so obvious for us. I would say 100% of all the men that we're arresting are regular consumers of pornography. And those two worlds, prostitution and pornography, are so closely connected. And we can see it so clearly because when we sit down and interview the woman, I mean, when we go through the phones of the women, I mean, it's just all the things you see at porn, in the porn movies, you want to do it with someone, right? And you will go to the ones that cannot afford to say no, because for them it's about surviving. For them it's about providing for a family, to put food on the table for your children. And that's so sad. And of course, I think I've been working for this maybe a little too long, but of course there are, we can see that things are moving forward, but it takes way too long time. But I hope we have several countries that has adapted this legislation. I hope more countries are on the way.
What do you feel are the most hopeful countries or the biggest battlegrounds?
Well, I'd say, I want to say I like a country like Germany, because I've been following Germany very closely for many years now. And when I first went to Germany, I think it was maybe 10 years ago, even more, maybe 12 years ago or something, the resistance was huge. I mean, we even had to, I was speaking at the conference together with other Swedish representatives, and there were bomb threats against the venue from brothel owners. We had to have police security. And when you go to Germany nowadays, it's such a huge shift. A lot of NGOs are supporting the Nordic model. We have more and more police officers that are saying, hey, we've had enough. We cannot have a situation where Germany is considered to be the brothel of Europe. We even today have high-ranking politicians who say we need to adopt the Nordic model. So things are happening. And I think if Germany would actually come to the conclusion that, hey, let's introduce this law, that would send a huge signal. Just like France did. I mean, no one believed it. But so I am quite positive to the future. I think more and more countries will. But once again, criminalizing the sex buyers are just a first step in the right direction. Okay, Sweden, we're not done in Sweden. We have challenges, but we are constantly trying to move forward. Now we have an ongoing investigation, a governmental investigation about exit programs. What can we do? Because the criticism in Sweden from survivors is that there needs to be better exit programs, better ways out of prostitution. The support needs to be even better. So I'm glad that you felt that it was that we had a good approach, but there is even more to be done. So we're still doing our job. There's always more work to be done, and I think the most important thing is not just to sit down and relax and say, hey, we found out this law, now everything is good, because it isn't. We have to move forward. And the traffickers and sex buyers are constantly finding new ways, and we have to follow them.
The last question I just wanted to ask you is, in addition to your work as a detective, you are an author, and tell me a little bit about why you decided to start writing and what, just that part of your world.
Wow, that's just, wow. I cannot hardly believe it's true, because I had no thoughts of writing compared to many other authors that's been writing since they were children. I started to write actually because I realized that I cannot go around giving presentations all the time. I have to do my job in the streets. I have to be out there. So a few colleagues told me that, Simon, you've seen so much and you've been through so much. Why don't you write a book about it? That's a great way of sharing your experience to people who wants to learn more. So that's how it all started. It was supposed to be one book, but now I'm releasing my 6th book after summer. So and what makes me what makes it very happy is that the books are being used a lot at schools in educating the younger generations growing up, and that feels really good, because I believe that you have to fight for this law. Every generation that's coming, you have to fight for it, and you have to give them the same knowledge, the same tools. You cannot take a law for granted. The day we will take our Sex Purchase Act, the Swedish model, for granted, that day we might lose it. So it's about constantly, I feel like a record on repeat. I've been saying the same things for 15 years now, but it's important. It's so important to always have this discussion. So
I agree, and that's one reason we make films is to reach people outside of our bubble and people who might have not ever studied the law, but they'll read one of your books, and reaching younger generations and people outside of our bubbles. So I'm really excited and glad, and that HarperCollins published them, which is a really well-respected company. So, well, we could probably talk for hours, but such a privilege and honor sitting down with you and having this conversation. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.